So let me tell you a little bit about history. This is the lecture about history. And so I'm going to jump back and forth teaching about history. Back in feudal Europe, when the barbarians from Britain and the Visigoths from Germany, when they ransacked Rome and Rome fell, it became the Dark Age. And so from the Dark Age, the Kingdom of Spain developed. The first kings of Spain were La Torres. And the reason I say that, because my last name is La Torre. My father was a Spaniard. So the tribes of La Torres run through Spain. Torres, Salvatores, De La Torres. Anyway, Spain controlled Europe and the New World. And Britain was a small kingdom that didn't compare with the Kingdom of Spain. So that's why when Spain, the Kingdom of Spain, controlled Europe, the Old World, and then the New World, Britain was a small kingdom, a nuisance kingdom, a little shriveled up kingdom, while the Kingdom of Europe, Western Europe, and the Kingdom of the New World was Spain. So Britain was inherited the language, regulatory, statutory, mandatory. And so that's why they kind of speak Spanglish in the Anglo tongues. So that's I'm gonna jump around like a professor. I'm gonna jump around to different parts of history. So the Spaniards ruled the New World for a long time. They ruled the Spaniards, the conquistadors. They savagely drove back the natives. They conquered the New World. And so the potato famine forced the Britanniers to come to the New World as settlers in the colonies. And they came to Philadelphia, Delaware, and they started forming their colonies in the New World that belonged to the Kingdom of Spain. And so after the Spain conquered the natives back and took over North America and Mexico and South America, and then the Caribbean, Spain controlled all that, and Spain controlled Western Europe. Christopher Colon, he worked for the crown of Spain. By the way, my mother was Colon too. Not from Italy, but from Puerto Rico. We all in Puerto Rico inherit Spanish blood. My grandfather is Spaniard. But let's get back to the history lesson. When the founding fathers came, or their fathers before them came and settled into the colonies, they gave birth to Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and they started a movement after the Tea Party and revolt against the king taxation. So they started creating the states, colonies, and they had a fight with the French and the Dutch in order to spread the new colonies of states and expand westward. And then when they finally won, Britain ended up with Canada, and the founding fathers ended up with North America. And then eventually they started the Spanish-American War to take over. They colonized Puerto Rico, and they wanted to colonize Cuba. And they drove the Spaniards out of Mexico. And then what they did, the Anglo-Americans settled illegally as migrants into Mexico territory as illegal migrants. The colonist Anglo-Americans settled into Mexico illegally as migrants. And then they annexed half of Mexico as illegal migrants. The Anglo-Americans. And so, revolutionary wise, let's fast forward to the Rough Riders. They started the Spanish-American War. They colonized Puerto Rico, and they wanted to colonize and colonize Cuba. And so that's a little bit fast forward. Let's go back to Europe. When Europe, let's actually go to Europe, but revert back in time. The old money of Europe, when Spain fell, Europe, Britain became the biggest kingdom on earth and became the United Kingdom. The sun never set on the kingdom or the crown of the United Kingdom. So, Europe, when America was colonies, Europe, the Rothschilds and the Morgans flooded old money from Europe into the new colonies. Anglo money, to be precise. United Kingdom money. And since the Founding Fathers rebelled, taxed the Tea Party, the Revolution, and we got rid of the Crown of Britain controlling the tax brackets in the United States. But let's fast forward now to the future. From this point of history, let's go forward to the future. Now, World War I started because the royalty empire of that kingdom of Queen Victoria, the descendants didn't get along with the royalty of the Kaisers. There was some feud there of jealousy because Germany's always been a powerhouse, an industrial powerhouse of Europe. So World War I started because of it, because Germany was an industrial powerhouse. And so after World War I, Germany was imposed reparations by Britain. And so the Germans were burning money, worthless money in wheelbarrows just to keep warm. And so that gave rise to fascism. And so after Hitler, the whole of Europe was in ruins. And now America was on top. After we bombarded Japan to become an economical colony, where Hiroshima and Nagasaki to bend the emperor to surrender. And we made Japan into a colony, an American economical colony. We funded the civil war that created Taiwan. And so we created Taiwan as an economical colony. We invaded the Koreas and split it in two. So we created South Korea into an economical colony. We tried to invade Vietnam and annex South Vietnam to make it into a colony. Unfortunately, we didn't win the Vietnamese War. We colonized the Philippines. And so America became rich throughout the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, 80s, 90s. And to this day, these countries in Asia are our economical colonies. And so, let's fast forward. Now, after the ruins of Europe, America, the baby boomers came back to America. So we became industrialized. And we started with our economical colonies of Asia. America's stock market started booming with our economical colonies of Asia. Our sweatshops in Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Philippines. We had a lot of sweatshops after World War II. They were our economical serfdoms. And so the banks of Wall Street got real fat. So we started flooding money into the Anglo banks of London in order to rebuild Europe from the ruins of World War II. So let's fast forward to the Trump era. Now you got Farage for the love of BP in the pockets of Trump for the love of Exxon. And Trump undermined Nord Stream 2 and Nord Stream 1 with Farage because it is jealousy of Brexit because Germany became the economical engine of Europe again. So Farage and his fascism under Trump feel some type of way about Germany becoming an economical bloc, the industrial engine of Europe. So fascism of Steve Bannon and Farage, and you notice Trump never say tariff Britain, but for the love of BP, Farage, for the love of Exxon, Trump, they wanted to undermine Nord Stream 2 and Nord Stream 1 of Germany, Angela Merkel. And then, after the second invasion of Ukraine, they sabotaged Nord Stream pipelines of Germany in order that Trump wants to beg Putin to get Exxon back into the Russian Arctic in order to flood Russian Arctic Exxon energy and to keep on floating the American dollars into Western Europe. So you start to see it's all been Angloed throughout history. The old money, the new money, and current standing of contemporary politics. So let's get back to a little bit of back in the past. And this is a theology, like a theologian historian, a professor. This is a lecture of history. So let's go back to a little bit, revert back to the past. Germany, after World War II, became a Cold World. The Cold War between Stalin and America. Because then there was a bipolar superpower. There was America and Russia, the only nations that controlled nuclear weapons. So Germany was split. On the west side of Germany, you have France, Britain, and America. And so you understand with the Asian colonies, how the Western Europes got rich. And then they kept the other side of the Berlin Wall poor. Because at that time, that's back forward again, before the United Nations, there was the League of Nations. Before the League of Nations, there was the Law of the Open Seas. And the Law of Open Seas date back to the crown of Spain going into the New World. And then Britain selling the oceans to conquer the New World off of Spain. That was the Law of the Open Seas. But then let's fast forward to World War I. It became the League of Nations that the President of America initiated. But then after World War II, it became the United Nations. But then America had a monopoly on the world stage to control the world order. As 3 permanent members, they outruled the 2 permanent members. And you got to understand, Britain and France has been submissive ever since as the 3 permanent members. So America controlled the veto power. And now the assembly is kind of like the House of Common Folk, serfdom, peasants. And now America is wearing their crown as the world sole superpower, as an indispensable world sole superpower. So I got to make analogies a little bit so y'all can understand what's going on in the United Nations. So, Lazinski said when he went to the United Nations, when Biden was grandstanding, and you got to understand, Biden for 3 years was bombarding the mainland of Russia with drones, with short range and then long range. And then Prime Minister of Britain conned Biden's state secretary into starting launching ATACMS with Storm Shadows. And then they convinced Macron. And Biden and the Prime Minister of Britain and Macron was crossing so many red lines for 3 years, allowing Lazinski to bombard the whole of Russia. And Putin has been well restrained. Not once has he launched missiles into NATO or America, or drones into America or NATO. Not because out of fear, because Russia has the most advanced nuclear stockpiles on Earth. And Putin takes nuclear war serious. He doesn't want to unleash a shitstorm on the world, but they're pushing it. They crossed so many red lines. That's why we got rid of Biden, because he was dragging the world into World War III. And I've seen how they were abusing Putin and crossing so many red lines. And Putin, I got to commend him for being a gentleman and restraining himself. So we got rid of Biden's senile dementia. I don't know why he's physically frail, but I assume he has dementia or Alzheimer's. But Lazinski, it broke my heart because Lazinski and the United Nations was saying that all nations should be permanent members of the Security Council, while Biden was grandstanding, patting himself on the back as a warlord, dragging the world into World War III. That's why we got rid of him from the Oval Office with his aviational Top Gun glasses. I probably think that his dementia, he thinks he looks like Tom Cruise. But let's stick to this lesson that I'm trying to teach the world. So, now Biden is on his way out. And Trump is on his way in with his snake oil remedies. And by the way, Lazinski, I do believe what you say, that all nations should be permanent members of the Security Council. So let's stick to this topic right here before I get off to the other lesson. I believe that 99% of the world's nations wants to be permanent members, including Britain and France, wants to let the rest of the world, along with China and Russia, wants to let the rest of the world to be permanent members of the Security Council, but Washington doesn't. Washington want to be imperialistic on the world stage as the indispensable world sole superpower with the hegemonic greenback enslaving the world. And now you got Trump as a snake oil con artist, tariffing 100% the global south into pure starvation with tariff crippling 100% the global south if we don't enslave ourselves to this petrodollar. So there's a tragedy. Not only will Lazinski not be allowed to be permanent members with the rest of the world, which I believe Lazinski has a point. All nations should be permanent members. But ever since this Bretton Woods Accords, America made up the world-based rules. You gotta understand, Britain and France was nothing after World War II. They were desperate. And America made the rules up to fit our own interests globally. To this very day, Britain and France are economically nothing compared to America. So they gotta jump through hoops. They gotta be told how high to jump by Washington and when to jump through hoops. So you got people like Lazinski that's being used as a proxy by America and NATO to take out their adversary. They're using poor Lazinski as a proxy, a pawn, a mark. If you was to listen to the CIA, he'll be considered a mark. And he's out there crying. And the United Nations saying that all nations deserve to be permanent members of the Security Council, which I'm 100% agreeing with. But this kingdom of America doesn't want to let the rest of the world sit. It reminds me that the United Nations is like the House of Common Folk, serfdom, peasants, meaning the global south. That if we don't submit to enslavement of the greenback, we are imposed 100% tariff to starve into submission until we submit into slavery of this greenback. At least that's what Trump thinks with his mighty dollar. So it's a shame. It's a shame that people like Lazinski are used as marks by America's Foreign Affairs, Foreign Intel Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, Services Arms Committees, and the rest of the European members in Western Europe. It's a shame. So even the rest of the European members are not allowed to be permanent members that sit at the table. So I fought for Lazinski because I truly believe that 100% of all nations on earth should be permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, including Palestine. Including Palestine If the Philistines were older than the Bible, then they deserve to be recognized as a state, a sovereign state. So, I believe that all nations on earth should be permanent members and that all nations should have equal votes. So when the world-based rules are voted upon, it'll be the conscience of humanity that will make the rules of the laws of the lands of this global order as humanity lives on this planet. To stick up for what they think the globe and all nations in their sovereign lands deserve. But America keeps a monopoly. So you got 99 countries that want to be permanent members because Britain and France has to take orders from this hegemonic power, this superpower. So America keeps the advantage of veto. America keeps the advantage. Because at this point, Britain, France, Russia, and China wants to let all the nations on earth to be permanent members. But this one nation that refuse to let all nations in. They refuse to lead the assembly in, the United Nations Assembly, for all nations to have permanent status as permanent members. So they all have equal votes. So when the world-based rules are afforded, all nations can vote equally their sovereign votes. So at this point, even Britain and France and Russia and China wants to let the rest of the nations on earth sit down as permanent members, but this one bottleneck nation that you call America, Capitol Hill, in that Roman building that Mitch McConnell likes to wear togas in, or Lindsey Graham, or Marco Rubio, or Ted Cruz. You know, they feel the Senate and the building emulates Rome. Since we're talking about history as a lecture, Rome. That's what the Senate in America emulates on the world stage. But let's say under this Trump movement, for the love of oil, they want to keep the whole world enslaved, including 99 nations on earth. 99% of all nations on earth. And this one nation wants to have impunity over the rest of the world. For the love of greed. You know, when all roots, the love of sin is all roots, and all roads lead back to Rome, or may I say the United States Senate. It's a shame. It's a shame that you have a president that's a good old boy. Now, the good old boys has always been the party of big business in America. Ever since the colonies settled of the Buccaneers and the New World. The good old boys has always been for big business. Now, let's fast forward to Farage, BP. Trump is in Trump pockets for Exxon. Farage and Trump are tied at the hips when it comes to sanctioning, or may I say tariffing Europe. They want to backstab Macron for the love of gasoline. They want to undermine Germany to cripple their economies in order for the banks of London to open up again with this BP, Exxon venture deals within the Trump administration. They want to tariff Canada. Trump said, he actually said he wants to make Canada the 51st state of the Union. He wanted to trade Mexico for Sweden, or was it Finland? One of those. This is the mockery of this nation that we call Trumpery. So, let's go back to all nations on earth wants to sit at the table, but America doesn't want to let it. America wants to keep its hegemony over the rest of the world. And it's a shame when the CIA use Luzinski as a mark. For America can use the pressure they have on Britain and on France to try to attack Russia directly with long-range missiles. Now, did I mention Putin didn't want to fight with Ukraine But the Azimov battalion, Putin feared that what was happening in America under the fascism of Trump and Steve Bannon, the War Room, if you ever heard his podcast, Steve Bannon, they tried to overthrow the elections in 2020, and Trump got scared and he took all his Exxon archives, his business racketeering. He ran to Mar-a-Lago because they were indicting him in New York for fraud, real estate fraud, tax evasion, bank fraud, insurance fraud. So he got sanctioned, a civil case found him guilty, $500 million, but he didn't have no money to pay for it, or let alone his rape victim, the female that reminded him of Marla Maples. They were friends, but she looked like Marla Maples back in the days. If you see a photograph of her in Trump Tower, the same photograph that Trump said, "Oh, that's Marla, I recognize her." But anyway, let's go back to the case. He got found $500 million. He ran back from the rotten apple, he ran back to the orange state. You know, the orange of the investigation? The oranges. He said that in the Oval Office because he doesn't have a good command of the language. He says the oranges of the investigation. You know, oranges. He meant to say origin of the investigation. But he ran with boxes stuck. I think he needed 2 moving trucks, trucks, to take all the boxes to Mar-a-Lago because he was afraid. When the coup d'etat didn't work out in 2020, he was afraid of being arrested for business racketeering for Exxon. So he ran and hid out in Mar-a-Lago. And then between him and Elon, they flooded the bots to win the popular votes with Elon supercomputers and AI. And so now he won the House, the Senate, and Congress, and the popular vote. And so now he's on 2.0 Trump, his second term. 2025 project. Now he wants to pick off where he left off. He wants to concentrate in throwing Lazinski underneath the bus in the hopes that Putin would allow Exxon back in the Russian Arctic. He will grovel at Putin's feet just to get back in the Russian Arctic. Or he will be willing to bombard Russia for the love of Exxon. Either way is a snake or a remedy, hidden in his venomous snake that we call J. Donald Trump. So, Putin realized that Trump, when he was trying to overthrow, you got to understand, after Charlottesville, Trump was bragging about the great replacement theory. He would defend General Lee. He would defend the Confederate bases. He denigrated blacks for kneeling and praying. The same thing Martin Luther King did in the civil rights movement. He kneeled and prayed. The same way Kaepernick kneeled and prayed. The same way the baseball players kneeled and played. The same way the football players kneeled and played. The same way the Congress Democrats kneeled and prayed for civil rights. But Trump was more vivid towards the Charlottesville Nazis, Ku Klux Klan, Charlottesville, picking up the torch, bragging about General Lee at every rally after Charlottesville. How he would defend the General Lee statues and the Confederate name bases. And see, there's a thing in Ukraine called the Azimov Battalion. And so Putin thought that Trump was going to break out a civil war. To circumvent Trump getting into the Russian Arctic with his fascism, Putin invaded the Azimov Battalion. But Biden didn't have the intel to connect the dots. So NATO went to war with Russia. And for 3 years, they ran amok all over Russia, the mainland, with drone planes, with long-range, mid-range missiles for 3 years. And you got to understand, Russia has the most stockpiles of nuclear weapons on Earth and the most advanced technologies for the nuclear stockpiles. And he's been a restrained gentleman for 3 years. Not once has he launched a missile into NATO or America, or a drone into NATO or America. Drone or missile. Not once. Not out of fear, but out of restraint. To not let the world fall into World War III. Nuclear war. But America thinks they have impunity as a world sole superpower to run amok not only over Russia, but the rest of the world with Trump. That he wants to tariff the world 100%, the global south, the most poorest regions on earth, if we don't stay enslaved to this greenback. And they refuse OPEC plus one to decouple from the petrodollar. But then this Anglo movement, Trump, Elon Musk, Farage, now they want to throw Lazinski underneath the bus, but they don't want to listen to his cries to let all nations on earth be permanent members of the Security Council. Now, I am preaching the same thing to Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, that let all nations on earth be permanent members of the Security Council. But this monopoly that America started, ever since Bretton Woods and they coined the United Nations, they've been controlling it like a monopoly. And like I said, after World War II, Britain and France were submissive to America's desires globally. To this very day, Britain doesn't have the economy, they don't have the military, neither does France, to compete with America. So America made up the International Monetary Fund, the Bank of Settlements, the World Bank, the SWIFT system, the Moody's system that rates the AAA ratings to devaluate the third world currency and give y'all poverty and runaway inflations in the hope that y'all will have revolutions when we starve y'all 100%, like Trump keeps on insisting, to tariff the global south into submission. But this is the monopoly, the tragedy of the United Nations. Even Britain, France agrees, along with Russia and China, that all nations should sit at the table as permanent members of the Security Council. But you got this one King Trump that wants to put his Kash Patel, that believes that Trump is the king of Russia. For the love of oil, Kash Patel wearing a Trump death skull to terrorize Latinos when they redlined the Republicans, the safe sanctuary cities, to deport Browns because they're afraid of the Great Replacement theory. They don't want to be a minority white population, so they believe in apartheidist, a waspy apartheidist. The same thing that happened in South Africa and India, but this time is under Trump's fascism. So you got Elon Musk and Farage and Trump leading the movement. And they want to break up Europe economically for the love of Farage movement, BP, and Trump's Exxon. They want to derive Western Europe's wealth. And they want to backstab France, Trump does, for gasoline, and Germany too. So you got this fascism rising up, and Putin realized what was going on after Charlottesville, and I realized what was going on after Charlottesville, after he kept on bragging at every rally about General Lee and protecting the Confederate named bases. See, I was working in the shadows to unravel his fascism. And I realized that there was Atomwaffens. These are Ku Klux Klan Nazi soldiers that are working as sleeper cells inside the Pentagon that believe in taking fissile material as Nazi parties and having nuclear dirty bombs to fight World War III. And see, Biden didn't understand all of this, but I did, and Putin did. So Putin invaded the Azimov battalions in a special mission to root them out in case American fascism run amok on the world stage with Trump's movement. And Trump falls into, you gotta understand, Putin knows Trump. So he plays into Trump's vanity, because that's what Trump likes, vanity. That everybody has to praise his vanity. He's better than Washington, better than Lincoln. His book is better than the Bible. But Putin knows what Trump is up to in Europe. So does Macron. So does the Parliament, House of Commons of Britain, Downing Street, Germany, the Chancellor, Scholz. All of them knows what Trump is up to. Canada, Trudeau, all of them knows what Trump is up to. Trump is a greed of God, the abomination, if you will, as an analogy. The abomination of greed. So now, this monopoly of Bretton Woods from the League of Nations, America created and coined the United Nations. And like I said, Britain and France were submissive because they was not in a position to argue with America. So when America said jump, they had to jump. When America said jump through loops, they had to jump through loops as 3 permanent members of the United Nations. To this very day, Britain and France can't compete with America. So they have to jump through loops. For America can keep the world coined to our petrodollars. And it's a shame when 99% of the world's nations wants to sit as permanent members, but America wants to keep a monopoly. It's like a bottleneck that keeps everybody stagnant, including the rest of Europe, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, the global South. There's just one country that doesn't want to let the rest of all nations be equal. I thought we believed in the Bill of Rights in America. I thought that was guide us beyond the Constitution. I thought that the Bill of Rights spoke righteousness. But unfortunately, it's all a hypocrisy. It's all a hypocrite oath. It's all self-serving togas in that rotunda as they emulate senators of a bygone era of a Roman Empire, where all roads of greed led through the greenbacks back to treasuries of Congress. It's a shame. When the United Nations Assembly is like the House of Commons, peasant serfdoms. And the only one crown is Trump. Listen to his FBI director trilogy of Trump, while Trump tries to covet the Russian Arctic. King Trump, with his FBI director, with his Trump skull, death skull. It reminds me of a terror group that fascism used to rely on, the brown shirts. The brown shirts to terrorize the citizens of the land. But now Kash Patel has death skulls of Trump. And his name, he has logos. Kash Patel is a weird, sick individual. Real sick. Him and Nunez are always in the pockets of Trump. Trump lined Nunez's pockets to step down after he leaked intel that allowed Trump to obstruct the Robert Mueller report. Nunez knew that Trump offered him in return CEOship of Truth Social. But it was Kash Patel that had access to the intel reports. That's why Nunez plucked Kash Patel of obscurity to head the investigation. And Kash Patel leaked out to Nunez, and Nunez leaked out to Trump. And Trump escaped to Mar-a-Lago with all the papers in the hopes that he can impose an oil coup d'etat for the love of Exxon in 2020. So now, Trump, holding to his playbook, used this degenerate Kash Patel. And Kash Patel, when you say cash, what do you think? You think money. But his name starts with a K. So what he does is a little scarf dedicated to his Trump adornment. He has a green scarf for cash. Green, color green. He puts a K, and then he puts dollar signs, because he sees dollar signs with Trump, and he definitely sees death skulls. It reminds me of a terror group of fascism. Hitler had brown shirts, but I guess the FBI is going to start wearing brown shirts all of a sudden, because blue lives don't matter when it comes to Trump. So the FBI is going to have to take off their FBI blue jackets and put on brown jackets, because y'all look like y'all working for a diabolical henchman of Trump with his death skull, Kash Patel. All about the cash. Him and Nunez are all about the cash. And their king is Trump, for the love of oil. Now Trump wants to covet the Russian Arctic. He wants to backstab Macron. He wants to cripple Germany's economy. For the love of Farage and Trump Brexiteers, So you start to see that history is always being Angloed, whether it be the old world money or the new world money. From the fall of the kingdom that never set on the sun never set on the kingdom of Britain, to the rise of this American imperial power on the world stage, with America's greenback as a Ponzi pyramid scheme for the love of enslaving the world to petrol, with America's currencies. So all nations, including, like I said, Britain and France, after America coined the phrase United Nations, and they used those troops to split the Koreas in two just to make a colony out of South Korea and stabilize the Japanese economical colonies, Taiwanese economical colonies, South Korean economical colonies. Then we tried to invade Vietnam and split it in half and try to take the South Vietnam, but we couldn't do it. We were stretched thin at that war. But you start to see who made the rules of the United Nations to this very day. There's only 3 permanent veto powers, and there's 2 against those 3. But let me tell you about Britain and France. They're still weak nations compared to America, so they're still told when to jump, how high to jump, how many loops to jump through. When America's barks, when the Senate barks, when America's Senate barks. So if there's one thing, the House of Commons are serfdoms under this hegemonic power of America, the veto power that makes the rules of the world to fit his own interests. So yes, even the House of Commons are peasants. Even the United Nations assemblies are serfdoms, because Trump will tear off the global South, third world, into poverty 100% for the love of oil. If any nation in the global order, including the Eurozone, dares to not use the world reserve currency, including the Eurozone, can you imagine, are also enslaved to the world reserve currency. And this one nation is a bottleneck on the world stage. That even Britain and France and Russia and China agrees that all nations should be allowed as permanent members. But you got one monopolistic nation on the world stage for the love of greed, for the love of the currency, to enslave the rest of the world. Can you imagine the gluttony of it, bipartisanly? Because you got to blame Democrats along with the Republicans. This has been going on for a while. The petrodollar. Can you imagine that even Europe, Western Europe, is enslaved? Right down to Britain, France, and the rest of the European members in the Western Alliance. And your Eurozone can't float because y'all will get tariffs to submission for the love of the world reserve greenback. Ain't that a mockery of all humankind? And we supposedly live by the Bill of Rights, but we're hypocritically stuck on constipations of constitutions. And they all swear themselves in to high office as hypocrites. And the Bill of Rights doesn't mean nothing at the end of the day. Not to Washington and not to the rest of the world as we stand enslaved. Can you imagine one nation on earth? Can you imagine? So when I look at the European flag, as an analogy, Washington tells all the European members how high to jump, when to jump, and what loops to jump through. The rest of European Western Alliance members had to jump through loops because this one world's sycophant of senators and the pagan belief of Washington on the world stage that even the European Western Alliance has to jump through their loops. That's what their flag remind me of when Washington refused to let the rest of the world sit as equal members in the world order. The atrocities in that. The atrocities that 99% of all countries are held back by one nation on earth. And that is based on the greed of that one nation's capitalism. So let me conclude this lecture with a little bit of physics, because I major in quantum physics and economics and history, political science, and theology. Let me conclude this lecture with this one thing. For y'all can take away the overall atrocities of this mockery of gluttony. Rockefeller realized that kerosene was a byproduct that he couldn't use no more to light up the houses in America because of electric light bulbs. And so he got along with Ford, and they created, or Ford brought in the industry, the combustion engine. He applied it to his vehicles. And so they figured out with Rockefeller that if you spray mist inside of a cylinder, and the cylinder on the downstroke, back on the upstroke compresses the mist, and then a spark of electric sparks it, it burns with fire, an implosion of fire. And that pushes the piston down, and on the downstroke, it starts to exhaust from the heads, the valves of the engine block. And so methylbutane octane is a form of exhaust. And those mist fumes goes up into the stratospheres, and guess what? The stratospheres has ionospheres, which is electric ions. And those mists starts to heat up again, the same way it heated up inside the cylinders, the same way. And it's called the greenhouse effect. And it's destroying this planet and everything in it. But snake oil con artists like Rockefeller's father is trumpery. Trump is worse than Rockefeller's father, if you ask me, as a con artist, as a venomous snake of a grift that's destroying not only the Union of Europe, not only starving the global South for the love of gasoline dollars, for the world reserve status, but it's destroying this planet and everything in it. Now, I want to conclude my lecture with that. Next thing you know, he will be tariffing OPEC plus one because they want to decouple, because they want to pivot to green energies, but he doesn't. He wants to stay stuck on gasoline. So you start to see that greed has no limits when capitalism, free capitalism, under this imperial country runs amok on the world stage. Now I start to hear the cries of all nations on earth. As a physicist, as an economic major, as a theologian, as a philosopher, as an activist, I start to hear the cries of all nations on earth. But this one nation pays deaf ears to the rest of the earth and everything in it. So with that, I conclude this lecture. And one more thing, students, the people that tune into my podcast, one more thing. I'm the founder of the theory of the United Nations grants in order to pivot OPEC plus one towards green renewable energies, because finite fossil fuel energies is coming through peak oil. The planet is not going to create any more fossil fuels for millions of years to come. And we have done squandered it with pressing the gasoline pedals. So now the world is peak oil and is running out. We done squandered it ever since Rockefeller's engine. And it takes the planet millions of years to create oil. So what I'm trying to do with OPEC plus one is get them prepared to be OPEC plus one in green energies, so they can conserve the fossil fuels, peak oil, for they can know how to pivot to green renewable energies as OPEC plus one members, for they can be in charge of the new world when it comes to green energy. So, guess what? Again, students, people that tune in to hear this podcast, it's people like Trump that doesn't want OPEC to decouple from the petrodollar. And it's a shame, because this planet is suffering because of it. So, as a theologian, I am negotiating with the United Nations to initiate with OPEC plus one the United Nations Grant Initiative. The United Nations Grant Initiatives that I am the theologian of, in order to prepare OPEC plus one to be responsible into the future with green energies. And I created a proposal unanimously for the Assembly to vote it into law. And if one nation vetoes it, then you know who one nation is to blame. But the initiatives for the United Nations Grant Initiatives is to pivot OPEC plus one to be the founders and the directors of the pivoting to green energies. Because you got to conserve peak oil, and you got to learn how to pivot as OPEC plus one members and control the industries of green renewable energies. Electric cars, windmills, tokamak centrifuge, clean electric energies. Yeah, as OPEC plus one members are in charge of that responsibility. But if this one nation doesn't want y'all to do it, if this one nation keeps y'all stuck, stupid on gasoline, then you know who to blame. And it's this one nation, under all, with their Ponzi scheme petrodollars, pyramid schemes. So study my videos on the United Nations Grant Initiatives, that I am the architect of that initiative for the leaders of OPEC plus one. So to finish up and conclude, this gasoline demagogue on the world stage that wants to enslave the whole world to the reserve currency of gasoline, the snake oil reminiscence that we call Trump, his days are being numbered when it comes to politics. But I want to pivot OPEC plus one members, including the American oil industries, to be in charge, to be stewards of pivoting to green energies. So y'all will control the supplies of lithiums, the supply of copper for electric cars, the supply of windmills, the supply of solar panels, the supply of electric cars. I'm creating electric wheels for cars that are electric generators. So when you drive in your car, your battery stays replenished. So you can drive long distances without having to plug your car in. As a physicist and an engineer, I'm contributing to this movement. But this is my initiatives, my grant, my foundation within the United Nations. This is my proposal for the Assembly of the United Nations. And the one nation cannot veto it. OPEC plus one must decouple from the petrodollar. They have the right to sell energies, including green energies, in their own currencies, their own national sovereign currencies. And all oil industries, including America's, they have to pivot and be the stewards, along with any entrepreneur nations, businesses that want to contribute to green energy. But OPEC plus one mainly has to pivot, decouple from the petrodollar, and pivot towards green renewable energies. Tokamaks, centrifuge, laser centrifuge, to generate electric energy, wind power, solar power, supplying lithium, copper for alloys, for batteries. They all have to be in charge as stewards to pivoting and controlling the industries of tomorrow's energy supplies. So what am What I am initiating, my proposal, is that all the oil interest companies that are currently controlling the world fossil fuel supplies, that y'all are to be the stewards of tomorrow's green energies. Y'all are to be the industries that controls green energies. And I want to pivot y'all towards that direction. And it starts with OPEC plus one decoupling from the petrodollar. It starts with OPEC plus one diversifying into green energies. So I created a United Nations grant initiative, founder of the proposal for the United Nations Assembly. Study my videos when it comes to this proposal. I have other videos that are called United Nations Initiative Grants, or I believe that's the title. I will have to look through my videos in this particular channel for y'all can study that. OPEC sovereign leaders. It starts with decoupling from the petrodollar in case this hegemonic one nation wants to reign over the world, one nation under all, with gasoline. So if this tyrant snake oil reminiscence of Trump wants to keep floating gasoline, OPEC plus one decouple from the petrodollar. Start to pivot to green renewable energies. Start to use peak oil wisely, because the planet is not going to make of it no time soon. It's going to take millions of years for the planet to make of it fossil fuels again. We squandered it in combustion engines, petroleum, oil. So we have to use it wisely, and we have to pivot towards green renewable energies. So I want OPEC plus one to start concentrating. Instead of the House of Salt concentrating on resort apartments, no, start to OPEC plus one, guide them into tokamak technologies, Lawrence Livermore laser fuse technologies, electric plants, windmills, electric batteries. House of Salt, start to take over that initiative. Start to guide OPEC plus one in that direction. Decouple from the petrodollar. If this scoundrel gasoline con artist doesn't want y'all to, he can threaten y'all with tariffs, but stick up your middle fingers to him and move on to the next, to a new and a dawning next world of comings, of clean stewards of this planet. Annex this snake oil con artist and move on to the new world. Usher in a new safe world. Don't let this world be destroyed with snake oil peddlers. I told you already as a physicist what that does, the mist of exhaust does to this planet when it hits the ionosphere. I already told you what that does. I'm a physicist, quantum physicist. And I have expertise in a lot of fields. So I believe that the House of Salt, instead of worrying the Crown Prince about the Line apartment resort, instead of worrying about that, start to know that you're the stewards of the Green New Revolution. That y'all will, OPEC plus one will command the march towards green renewable energies. That y'all will command the commanding heights of those corporations that controls green renewable energies. That y'all set the example while one nation of gluttony was pushed out the way with their abomination of greed. The snake oil remedies, the venomous snake that tries to take in the whole world as tender woman's with his venom, a snake oil peddling remedies. So it's up to OPEC plus one to shove this one nation out the way, decouple from the petrodollars. Start to pivot to green renewable energies in your own sovereign currencies. So y'all will command the commanding heights of green renewable energies for the long foreseeable future. With your own sovereign currencies. Break the shackles of enslavement for the rest of humanity on earth.